Hello, good afternoon, a good day from whatever part of the world you are joining in from, and welcome to the Oxford World English Symposium 2022. My name is Joy Onyemaichi. I am a language assessment consultant with the British Council here in Nigeria, or ELT for short. So, once again, thanks for joining in this session. And I shall be discussing the relationship between dictionaries and world Englishes on the one hand, and the implications for English language teaching on the other hand. Now let's look at the concept of dictionaries. Now, as you can see on the screen, dictionaries are artifacts that represent the cultural, linguistic, and bibliographic heritage of a language community. So, the linguistic, cultural, and literary or even political considerations are brought to the foreground when we decide to explain the English language of a community of speakers. And dictionary users naturally and quite commonly look up a word in the dictionary only for a particular reason, that is, to get advice on usage. In other words, the essence of a dictionary is its applicability in the context of users' communicative needs. So, what we're saying in essence is that dictionaries don't exist just for their own sake. Dictionaries are a means to an end in the sense that they are a collection of words, symbols, terminologies that represent the cultural, linguistic, and bibliographic heritage of a language community. Now, if you look at the sketch on the screen, you can see the dictionary in the outer circle. You can see that it is an embodiment of culture, linguistics, and bibliography. So, what this says is that every word in the dictionary represents an aspect of culture, an aspect of linguistics, or an aspect of words that are used. And we know that words do not exist for themselves, they are a representation. So basically, a dictionary serves only one purpose, and the purpose it serves is to reflect the expressions that represent the realities of a community of users. So if I was going to use a dictionary, I just want to know, oh, how does this dictionary help me to convey my thoughts? And how does that affect me? Because my thoughts, my realities are products of my context and my environment. So this is the, very close relationship between dictionaries, culture, and linguistics. Now let's look at the concept of World English. And like we see on the screen, World English is essentially connotes the recognition of the diversity and pluricentricity of the English language. Now, as Canaveline rightly puts it, World English belongs to everybody who speaks it, but it is nobody's mother tongue. Now, what this is saying is World English is not something that was coined or produced or um, cooked up by any individual. It is a product of usage. Now, I can say that American English is a mother tongue for an American. British English is a mother tongue for a British, but then World English is not anybody's mother tongue because, of course, nobody owns the world. So, your World English is the English that expresses the peculiarities and the uniqueness of your own world. And that is how the concept of World English is so culture and context centered. So, World English is something that happens, or it is something that is given birth to when a community of users try to express the peculiarities using the English language. Now, in the case of Nigeria, for example, the Oxford Dictionary realizes that by taking ownership of English and using it as their own medium of expression, Nigerians have made and are continuing to make a unique, distinctive contribution to global English. Now, what does this mean? When we say Nigeria has made a contribution to English as a global language, now what it means is you brought English to us. However, the English you brought with us, I mean, the English you brought for us, does not reflect or does not convey certain things that are peculiar to us. And that is understandable because these things do not exist in your world. So there was no need for you to have any words or expressions that represent them. Now, let's take, for example, if you look at a word like danfo, you have to be a Nigerian to understand what danfo is. It is a kind of buses that are used for commercial purposes in some parts of Nigeria. If you look at a word like Okada, for example, it is the concept of using motorbikes or motorcycles for commercial purposes. Now, the word Okada probably is not needed in the vocabulary of an average Australian or Canadian, and this is because in that part of the world, motorcycles are used for a different purpose. So, we have to speak English as Nigerians and we have to convey some things that are peculiar and unique to us. But we just realize that the English is incomplete or inadequate in this context, not because there is anything wrong with the English that came from Britain or anywhere else, but the thing is that English does not represent certain things that are only obtainable in our own context. So the contribution that we have made to the English language is by introducing a new notion, introducing certain concepts, certain realities in our own peculiar environment, and we're trying to communicate these things in the English language. And that is what the Oxford English Dictionary realizes because they are aware of the fact that as English moves from one community to another, something happens to it. If you look at the sketch we have here, you have the English language, you have different communities, and then you have cultures. When these three come together, we have the world English. And this arrow is still pointing on to show you that it is an endless phenomenon. That is to say that expectedly in future, more varieties or more variants of English language are likely going to come up because the English language is still going to meet more different cultures and realities that are probably not present at the moment. So basically, the concept of World English is that it is a product of usage, it is a product of contact of a language with different communities and cultures. Now let's look at all of this. How does it play out in English language teaching? Now, if you look at the post-colonial scenarios, we say that against the welcome trend of English language evolving from an instrument of colonial domination into an authentic medium of expression that can serve as a key to personal development and social mobility for its speakers in post-colonial nations, ELT in different contexts is perceived as putting learners under pressure to develop language skills and proficiency as defined by norms that are still largely based on the idea of a single colonial standard of English. And this is the situation. It can actually be called a problem. And what is it talking about? Learners in post colonial scenarios are under pressure to develop language skills and proficiency as defined by norms that are based on the idea of a single colonial standard of English. And the truth is that there is no single colonial standard of English. This is because if we were to maintain a particular standard as imported or as used to serve colonial purposes at the time, then language will no longer be dynamic. The society cannot evolve. But because society is dynamic and language is an expression of society and culture, the English language coming in contact with such dynamism can only evolve. And that is what we have to take into cognizance. Now, this unhealthy situation, that is the unhealthy situation of trying to stick to a single colonial standard of English, both in theory and practice, is something that needs a rethink. We need to look at English language teaching again and begin to see how we can avoid being stuck in one particular situation, or to avoid being tilted to one extreme situation and position. So it calls for a new ELT model. Now, Pillar 2011 identifies two approaches to language education. Now, one approach aims at attainment of linguistic competence, whereas the other approach aims at attainment of communicative competence. Now, he observed that linguistic competence alone does not adequately account for how a language is used. It's okay for you to understand all the rules of grammar. It's okay for you to understand all the spelling rules. It's okay to understand all the syntax and morphology of languages. But that should not be an end in itself when it comes to ELT. We should realize that these linguistic tools are a means to an end, and the ultimate end is communicative competence. Therefore, there is a need to balance up adequate communicative competence that takes adequate cognizance of learner and user context. So in order for you to move to move further from linguistic competence up to communicative competence, you have to take adequate recognition of the contexts of the learners and how they actually use the language or the target language to communicate such contexts. And in order to achieve this, the three key components of ELT that must be adequately engaged are the teachers, the curriculum, and the learners. The teachers, the curriculum, and the learners. What should we be doing with the teachers? What should we be doing with the learners? And what should we be doing with the curriculum in order to come to a balance between linguistic competence and communicative competence? First of all, we look at the teachers. What are the needs of teachers? As you can see here, this is a training session organized by me in one of our Train the Trainers workshops sometime in Nigeria. Now, what are the needs of teachers? Training and peer support. Now, training is particularly important, speaking in the context of Nigeria, for example, and this is because most of the teachers are products of the same system. So they teach the way they were taught. They are trying to convey the things they knew or the things that were handed down to them. So what we need to do is to begin to do it. There is an obvious need to sensitize the teachers and examiners through series of trainings and retrainings on the need to embrace and inculcate pluricentricity in the pedagogy of English language. So teachers need help, teachers need support, teachers need ongoing training. They themselves have to first of all realize this very concept. And when they realize it, they have to know that methodologies and approaches need to be adjusted such that we are not only working to achieve linguistic competence in our learners, but then we're trying to equip them with the necessary skills that would help the same learners to be able to use their linguistic competence for communicative competence. And next we look at the ELT curriculum. Of course, the curriculum is the instrument, because in between the teacher and the learner, you have the curriculum. The curriculum is like the bridge that connects the teacher with the learner. So what should be the objective of the ELT curriculum? The overall goal of ELT should be to produce learners who are able to perform their additional, interpersonal, and textual functions in English. Now, this is the idea of Burns, 1990. Now, what does this mean? Now you can see we're looking at additional function, interpersonal functions. In the real world, you are dealing with human beings. Now, the person you are going to meet out there does not know the definition of adverbial clause, for example, but then you're going to be talking with that person. How do you relate with that person? The person is particularly not interested in everything you know about the language, but he's interested in how you're able to relate with him adequately and appropriately using what you know about the language. So, content. The curriculum content must essentially be 21st century core skills compliant. And if we look at 21st century core skill compliant as reflected in the picture, you have critical thinking and collaboration anchored in creativity for the ultimate goal of communication. Critical thinking and collaboration anchored in creativity for the ultimate goal of communication. Now, critical thinking, how does that come into ELT? English language teaching. Language is an expression. I mean, it's used for the purpose of expression. And of course, before you talk, you have to think. So your thought processes are to be conveyed. At the same time, you should be able to perceive the thoughts of another person through their expressions and through their utterances. So this is where critical thinking. You should be able to think. You should be able to examine yourself. What am I doing? Why do I do the things I do? And when you understand what you're doing, when you understand yourself, then you want to know why you are doing those things, and you want to be able to convey the same information to someone else. Now we look at collaboration. How does that reflect? How does that concern ELT? Initially, we talked about world Englishes. So, collaboration is a situation where a language comes in contact with a culture or with another community. And when that happens, it is no longer your way or my way, it becomes our way. So, we are coming together, and the ultimate aim is to be able to convey and mutually understand ourselves. You understand my realities, I understand yours, and we're able to make some compromises, as it were. Now, all of this is anchored in creativity. Language itself is creativity, because your ability to represent ideas, to represent your feelings, to represent your thoughts using adequate words is a form of creativity, because your thoughts, your minds, your processes are evolving all the time. So you are creating new ways of addressing and actually recognizing them. So all of that is creativity. And when you bring together the critical thinking, the collaboration, and creativity, there is only one purpose it is meant to serve, and that is the purpose of communication. So that is why we say ELT must be 21st century core skills compliant, because these are the skills that people need to be able to function effectively in the 21st century workplace or study scenario. Now, another component is the learning resources. The Oxford English Dictionary, as clearly demonstrated in initial presentations, recognizes the adaptations of English language to indigenous contexts of use around the world. So, in other words, the Oxford English Dictionary is actually 21st century core skills compliant. It is helping people to think, reflect on their own ways of life. It is helping collaborations. It is facilitating creativity, and it is making communications a lot better. Now let's look at the learner's goal. We have talked about communicative and linguistic competence. How do we assess the progress of learners? Now, as we have said earlier on, linguistic competence alone does not adequately account for how a language is used. Therefore, in emerging contemporary language teaching, classroom activities, and assessment practices, emphasis needs to be balanced between proficiency in communicative competence as well as linguistic competence. So, what do we do with our learners? What do we do with our students? We have to get them to set a goal. And what should be their goal? Their goal should not be um, competence in linguistic component. Their goal should be communicative competence, because when they step out of the classroom, they are going into the real world where they are going to be interacting with different people. They're going to be interacting with different situations and different scenarios, and their ability to understand themselves, communicate their ideas, and at the same time receive and perceive the ideas of others is what is going to determine their success or their failures outside of the classroom. In conclusion, what have we said? Dictionaries represent cultural and linguistic heritage of a language community. So, dictionaries do not exist for themselves. Dictionaries are not ends in themselves, they are a means to an end. In other words, they are the instruments, they are just a reflection of the thought processes, they are a reflection of the realities of a community of speakers. However, it is important to note that any dictionary of outer circle English, now by outer circle English, we mean any dictionary that is used outside a context where English language is a first language. So any dictionary of outer circle English must always contend culturally, commercially, and ideologically with the long-standing lexicographic traditions of two recognized global standards of English. That is British English and American English. That is to say, in as much as we're trying to promote world Englishes, in as much as we're trying to embrace pluricentricity, we should always realize that English still remains English. If, for example, we begin to tamper with the fundamental rudiments or rules of how the language itself works, then it is no longer English. So that is to say, we don't stand up arbitrarily and begin to tamper with spelling rules, for example, or we want to change meanings arbitrarily, because if everybody in different parts of the world decide to change the meaning of words arbitrarily, then there will be no English. So it is Nigerian English, yes. It is Indian English, yes, but then it is still English. So there are some fundamental traditions that must be maintained. However, the culture and the context in which language is being used cannot be thrown away. And another important point is that the overall goal of English language teaching, especially in second language context, should be to produce learners who are able to perform their ideational, interpersonal, and textual functions in English. So the sole purpose is not to learn about English, but to be able to use English in different language functions. And then in order to facilitate this, relevant learning resources must be adopted in the classroom. So there are certain facilities, for example, like we have said earlier, the Oxford English Dictionary quite well realizes the fact that English language is being imported into different contexts of usages around the world. And that is why the Oxford English Dictionary is recognizing the peculiarities and the uniqueness in these different parts of the world. Now, apart from the dictionary, there are also other forms of classroom resource materials. What kind of textbooks do we use in the classroom? Because these are very, very key in order to facilitate what we are trying to do. And also, there should be ongoing engagement with relevant stakeholders And this has to be maintained in order to ensure greater awareness and advocacy for provision of learning resources that address the specific needs of learner context. Now, education, English language teaching, and all of that does not happen in a vacuum. It happens in a context, and these contexts are managed, owned, and controlled by different stakeholders. And it is very important to engage with these different stakeholders in order to ensure that the purpose of pluricentricity, in order to ensure that world Englishes do not go to the other extreme. Now, in the case of Nigeria, for example, such collaborative partnerships have been initiated. Now, we have, for example, the ministries of education. What is the role of the ministries of education? The role of the ministries of education is to make policies. And because they are the managing bodies, the Ministry of Education makes policies, and these policies apply to the these policies apply to implementers like the schools, and these policies also apply to learners. These policies apply to teachers. It applies to the curriculum. So what should the Ministry of Education be doing? The Ministry of Education should come up with policies that ensure that the curriculum becomes compliant with what we are talking about. And then there is implication also for examination bodies. What should the examination bodies test? If the examination bodies themselves only test communicative competence, it means the teachers will teach to the test. And at the end of the day, the students prepare themselves for examinations that only test communicative competence at the expense of, the examinations that test linguistic competence at the expense of communicative competence. So the implication, what is expected of examination bodies is to structure examinations in such a way that as students prepare for these examinations, they are also acquiring linguistic skills as well as communicative skills. Because outside of examination, these are the things that they will be needing. And there is implication for school owners. What should school owners do? School owners are in a position to ensure that the right materials are used in their classrooms. Because without the use of the right kinds of materials, you discover that students, teachers, learners are handicapped in the sense that any material that does not promote critical thinking, any material that does not promote creativity, materials that do not promote collaboration, or materials that do not promote communicative skills are not the best in the context of what is being talked about. So school owners have a responsibility to ensure that the right kinds of materials are brought into the classrooms. And then in the case of Nigeria also, there's ongoing engagement with the body, the main examination bodies we have in Nigeria, for example, the West African Examination Council, we have the National Examination Council, and we have some universities that are already keen into this project. So essentially, what we are saying is that ongoing engagement with relevant stakeholders must be maintained to ensure that greater awareness and advocacy for provision of learning resources that address specific needs of learning context are put into consideration. And hopefully, like we said, the concept of world English is an evolving tradition. It is something that does not stop, and we actually look forward to more varieties, more versions of English language coming up, because like we said earlier, the society is dynamic, things change over time. And because they change over time, for the English language to be able to capture the evolving realities and dynamisms in a changing world, then there is the need to have a shift. So thank you very much for being a part of this section. And then I hope to see you again some other time. If you have any questions, you can send them to oed.uk@oup.com. Thank you.